Hi, I'm Mark Beaver.
I'm Nick Keene.
I'm Jake Majewski.
I'm Michael Ludoff, and our analysis is on NFL quarterback data.
Our main question was, how does an NFL quarterback's passing stats affect their team's chance of winning? We took multiple measures to find out the answer to this question.
We wanted to determine which quarterback stats factored into a team's chance to win. Some of the variables we measured included completions, attempts, touchdowns, yards per game, and more. We collected this data from ESPN on quarterback stats and their team wins for the past 5 years, and we utilized tests for multicollinearity and ran multiple regressions on our independent variables to be able to interpret our findings and come up with conclusions. Some motivation behind why we wanted to figure out an answer to this question was that the quarterback is perhaps one of the most important positions in all of sports, let alone football. So we figured that the quarterback's play would play a crucial role in a team's ability to win games each week.
We're also big football and NFL fans, which really motivated us to use these different analytic ways of like regression and multicollinearity to figure out really how important each stat is to the quarterback's play and team wins.
Next, we wanted to test some of our variables in order to find out what is the correlation between them, such as what's the correlation between number of team wins and completions, the correlation between team wins and attempts, and between number of team wins and completion percentage.
Some of the other variables that we wanted to find the correlation between are the number of team wins and yards per game, number of team wins and touchdowns, number of team wins and interceptions, and number of team wins and sacks.
From our analysis here, we came up with a few hypotheses. The first one is that a quarterback with a higher number of touchdowns will lead to more wins, making sense because in football, to win games, you need to score points.
Our second hypothesis was that a quarterback who throws less interceptions will lead his team to more wins. This makes sense because turnovers are a crucial part of the game, so holding on to the ball would correlate to more wins.
And our third one here is that a quarterback with a higher completion percentage will also lead to more team wins, making sense because the quarterback that's more efficient is going to help his team a lot more in the long run, leading to more wins.
We made multiple assumptions before running our regression test. First, we assumed that a quarterback's passing stats can affect the team's ability to win games. We also assumed that quarterback rating, completions, completion percentage, yards per game, and touchdowns would positively impact the number of team wins. Secondly, we believed that interceptions, sacks, and yards lost on sacks would negatively impact the number of team wins.
Our data was received from the ESPN website, which consisted of 160 rows of passing statistics from all 32 NFL teams ranging from the past 5 regular seasons. We had 12 previously mentioned variables that we concluded would have an impact on the number of team wins.
There were some alternatives that we were not able to use for our testing. The first one here is simple linear regression, which didn't work because we had way more than one independent variable.
We also chose not to use hypothesis testing due to the fact that we had a lot of variables, so it would have made it very hard to hypothesis test on each variable. We used multiple methods to run our tests. First, we used a correlation test. This helped us to figure out which variables we had that were too correlated to each other to allow us to eliminate them, and we eliminated ones that correlated to each other with values more than 0.7.
Our second test that we ran was a multiple regression test, which allowed us to evaluate each of our variables to find out which ones were significant in our model with p-values less than 0.05.
First test we took here was the correlation test, which tests multicollinearity between variables. From this test, we tested 12 variables here, only got to keep 7 of them. The 5 that we had to take out because they were too correlated were yards per attempt, longest pass for the season, yards lost for sacks, and the passer rating.
After we ran the correlation test, we then proceeded to run the multiple regression test to test the p-values for all of our independent variables. And we were able to find that all of our variables had p-values below the 0.05 that we were looking for, besides yards per game, which, while it wasn't statistically significant, it still fit our data, so we decided to keep it in. And we also ran the regressions for it too, for the residual plots, and we found that they fit our data well, so we decided to keep it in.
After running for our test for significance, we were able to come up with a regression model equation. And you can see this regression equation here. And this model was able to be used effectively to predict how many games a team should have won based on our model for the 2018 season. And we found that our equation successfully predicted the team's records within about 1 or 2 games for every team.
So with our regression model, we wanted to use it to predict how many games teams should have won in 2018 compared to how many they actually won. So I chose to do my favorite team, the Detroit Lions. And as you can see, they had a rough year, only going 6-10. And our regression model was close and was able to predict it within a game. And our regression would have predicted them to finish 7-9 on the season.
The next team we chose to test our regression model on was the Chicago Bears, which is my favorite team. As you can see, we had a good year. We went 12-4 in this last year. However, our regression model predicted us to lose 2 more games, going 10-6, which can make sense because according to most, our quarterback play isn't the best. But as you can see, it's still within a couple games of the actual record last year.
The next team we made a prediction for was the New England Patriots, who are the reigning Super Bowl champions and have arguably the best quarterback of all time as their QB. And their team record for 2018 was 11-5, and our regression model predicted them to be 11-5, which makes sense that it's that effective as they have such a good quarterback, which can really be used to predict their team wins.
Our next team that we predicted was the New Orleans Saints, which had the best regular season record. For 2018, they went 13-3, and our regression model predicted that they would go 14-2, which makes sense with a quarterback throwing the ball like Drew Brees.
In conclusion, we did find that quarterback play is sufficient in predicting the number of team wins in a season. Regarding our hypotheses, we found that quarterbacks with a higher number of touchdowns will have more team wins, quarterbacks with less interception will have more team wins, and the quarterbacks with a higher completion percentage will have more team wins. With these studies, we also did kind of confirm that teams that have better quarterbacks will typically win more games, and the teams that have worse quarterbacks will typically lose more.